This review is for a mature rated game. Viewer discretion is advised.
November 2019 wasn't that long ago. It is also the date of a story told in the 1982 science fiction film Blade Runner, which was based on Philip K. Dick's novel To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. When the 1992 director's cut of the film was released and made the film more well known, the Blade Runner partnership approached several gaming companies in the hopes of doing a Blade Runner game. But that was the first of many troubles, as the rights to the film were really spread out. What do you do? Can you use footage or music from the film? Can you tell the same story? Well, before going into detail about what ended up happening, here's something personal. Blade Runner, which I discovered through the 1992 or 2007 cuts, is one of my favourite films. When I randomly read somewhere that a 1997 game based on it was made, I was intrigued, yet not hoping to get the chance to play it on a modern computer. Then I recently saw it was on GOG or Good Old Games and I nearly lost my mind. Let's see if publisher Virgin Interactive and developer Westwood Studios did well in bringing the Blade Runner universe to life. The best thing that those in charge of the game could do with the story was to tell an original one with the same setting, though it is a little more complex than that. The story begins in almost exactly the same way as the film, with the opening scrolling words explaining replicants, followed by the memorable atmospheric opening shots showing 2019 Los Angeles. The aforementioned replicants, advanced robots that are next to impossible to differentiate from humans, are suspected of murdering a group of animals in an animal sales business. But are the animals fake, considering how rare real ones are? Are the replicants involved, and if so, what are their motives behind such a horrible crime? The one to find the answers to these questions is the player-controlled rookie Blade Runner, Ray McCoy. So Rick Deckard from the novel film is not the main character, though his story takes place roughly at the same time as the game story, which is alluded to at least a few times. A few characters from the film are featured, as well as locations like the Tyrell Corporation and the police station, enough to even delight any Blade Runner fan. The dystopian story in itself is very good, complete with a subject matter that's generally open to interpretation, and the mostly ponderous philosophical nature of the dialogue that leads to a relatively slow pace and not as much action scenes. There's even a film noir style voiceover for McCoy, a feature that was omitted in the later cuts of the film.
Guzzo was one of the old-time guys who took their knocks in the streets. He had a friendly way about him, but you didn't want to turn your back on him if you were less than a friend.
And speaking of the animals, there appears to be a bit more of a focus on them that is borrowed more so from the novel than the film. The only flaws with the story are that the story taking place at the same time as the film is not always exactly believable, and some of the concepts and themes could potentially go over a non-fan's head. Still, even they could appreciate the interesting story as it unravels, especially with its open-ended nature that comes down more so to the gameplay. But before analysing the gameplay, the question is, how does this game look and sound for a 1997 game? Well, the answer is as ambitious as it could for its time, with mixed results. First of all, much of the graphics are almost identical to the film, with the composition of the mise-en-scene, the lighting, the colours, the effects, the 3D models. Any fan will surely recognise the shots from the film, such as the low lighting of a hotel, but the settings and character models tend to be simply grainy, pixelated and blurry. To be fair, the use of voxels was done in such a way that computers were able to actually run the game, but the pixelation and the almost laughably stiff animation don't match up to the generally good numerous pre-rendered backgrounds and nicely shaded lighting and colours. The sound, however, is thankfully better. The voice acting, some of which is done by some of the cast from the film, is actually not that bad, save for some easily overlooked hammy moments. The rights for Vangelis' exceptional film score could not be secured, so music tracks either had to be original or recreated. And by ear, surprisingly. Hey, from another person who plays by ear, gotta say, job well done. The music very simply makes you feel like you're in the Blade Runner universe. The gameplay is similar to that of many point-and-click adventure games. You move a cursor around so McCoy can move around locales and interact with items and characters. But it is different in ways that one may not be expecting. For starters, the puzzles are not exactly puzzles. The general progression of the game is largely down to finding leads for interrogation with other characters, as well as items, photos, and other clues lying around the crime scenes. For the most part, this compelling series of investigations will really make you feel like a detective, and the Blade Runner fans will recognize the Esper and Voight comp machines. Using the Esper to enhance photos to find clues takes a bit of time to get to grips with even for fans, but it is actually one of the most interesting parts of the game, as you drag the mouse pointer around parts of a photo to zoom in on the most important clues or revelations. The Voight comp machine, which can be simply called an advanced lie detector, is used to figure out whether a number of individuals in the game are human or replicant. You have to be careful with the intensity of the questions you select, be too extreme and cause a participant to panic, or be too easygoing and the test will be terminated with there being no result. You as McCoy can react to the result or lack of, but be careful not to retire humans or... Yeah, that's unfortunate. How you deal with characters with or without the machine also shows the open nature of the game. Some of the more prominent characters are randomly chosen as human or replicant when you start a new game, and characters also move around in real time. In a somewhat similar fashion to other games such as Majora's Mask or even the Shenmue and Persona games, most of the characters move around the locales. For example, a shop owner might tend to something before you can talk to them in front of a counter, and replicants and other characters can suddenly appear, sometimes in unexpected situations. There are individuals moving around in the background, which McCoy can talk to, but it doesn't do anything.
You got anything that's a match for these? Does this badge mean anything to you? McCoy, LPD.
Nevertheless, the ambition in making characters not stay in one spot, not to mention the random events and interrogations that can change so much as the game's ending, makes the game worth playing more than once. Don't forget to save multiple times. But even after doing more than one run of a game, one can't ignore the flaws. The game does unfortunately feature some of the problems or staples of a point-and-click adventure genre. There is a fair amount of pixel hunting where some items or clues lying around, or even entry points to other locations, are not always easy to spot. It also doesn't help that you're given the option to click on McCoy to open the menu, something that can be done with your keyboard. That and the aforementioned background extras don't alleviate the pixel hunting problem. It can be sometimes hard, especially in the middle of a game, to figure out how to progress, which can be due not to having analysed photos in the Esper fully, found the right items, sometimes to go to a new location in your spinner vehicle, similar to Sam & Max Hit the Road, or said the right things to the right characters at the right time. Notice the emphasis on right time there. It can be annoying sometimes to realise you had to mostly wait for a character to move or do something, just to progress the story. This overall means that the game is probably a little too open for its own good. It also feels like the number of entry points is a little too much, as certain screens, such as a part of a hotel, can be reached by two ways. Why design it that way? The ambition of the game also extends to the combat of the game, where you can use McCoy's gun. But the combat ultimately feels shallow. It's simply about aiming on a screen, and there's not a lot of it too. The combat being used sparingly does thankfully reflect the film, but a little more could have been done outside of just retiring replicants or even destroying rats in the sewers. Especially one tricky screen, which features one of the most questionable pieces of real-time game design in the whole game. There's also a combat course to see if you're good at shooting accurately, but it's ultimately meaningless and not that fun. The combat is also impacted by the difficulty level you choose at the start of the game. Money and ammo are unlimited in easy mode, but not so on normal and hard, where the amount of damage McCoy or other characters can sustain is changed. The difficulty level ultimately doesn't affect the main story progression of the game. Considering all these problems, are they easier to overlook if you're a fan of the Blade Runner universe? Well, to an extent, yes. The graphics, while ambitious and very true to the film, are dated. Some of the gameplay is a bit frustrating and hard to figure out, and broadly speaking, the story is somewhat lacking in the nuances that made for films and even novels so appealing. But this is, overall, a compelling game to play. It is a short game, taking roughly 6 to 10 hours to complete if you can figure out how to progress most of the time. But that makes going back through it again for different events, difficulties, and endings worth it. Blade Runner fans, or even point-and-click adventure fans, will surely enjoy this game. Developers, this is a good example of how to make a game based on a film or other IP. Take note. It is good to see this game come back through GOG, as well as getting an enhanced edition on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One and Switch later in 2020. This game was ultimately not lost in time. Like tears in the rain. My 50th review is next. If you've been watching my channel recently, you should know what it is. It's part 1 of the review though.